Welcome in, I'm Artress, and in this video, we're going to be going over what I think are the best decks for the OP14 EBO4 meta. Now, with this new set, there's quite a lot of new leaders that are actually somewhat viable, and we haven't experienced that in a little bit because OP13, in my humble opinion, was a little bit stale, where you had both Ace and Emu being the top two contenders, and then every other deck trying to struggle to keep up with them. But with 14, we're actually seeing more viability with other leaders, and as a result, I think it's a good time to do a tier list. A couple things to note about the tier list: not every leader will be on here. If you don't see a leader that you like to play, it doesn't mean that I think the leader is bad. It just means that I don't think it's going to be super competitive for a treasure cup or a regional, or maybe there's a leader that does something a little bit better in the same color. Of course, all of this is my opinion and it will probably differ a little bit from yours, and that's totally fine. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think, but all I ask is you just keep it respectful. Before we start though, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that sub button and give the video a thumbs up. It helps out the channel so much. Thank you all for the support. Before we do go through the tier list, I want to talk a little bit about the tiers themselves. We have obviously S through F. Now, F doesn't mean it's the worst deck out there. The way that I have this is that I think S are meta-defining decks. These are decks that I expect to win regionals or treasure cups with more consistently than not. A tier decks are going to be decks that I will likely see in the top 16 very consistently. These decks are very easily going to be able to win as well, but there's probably something holding them back, whether it's a consistency piece or maybe a deck in the S tier is a little bit better than them. So A tier decks might have that spice to be able to get into the S tier, but something is just slightly holding them back. The B tier are decks that are competitive, that can hold their own against the S and A tier, but maybe they have some bad matchups. Maybe there's some rogue matchups that just really poop on them. And B tier decks are going to be ones that I can consider to be in the top 32 very consistently. Now, rogue tier decks are decks that I think if people are piloting these decks very highly, they will do very well, but unfortunately, they might crumble in the hands of an average player. Maybe they don't have the same consistency as the S through B tier. I can expect to see these decks hit in the top 64 and maybe hit top 32. If they're very lucky, they might be able to get 16 or a little bit higher than that. And of course, the F tier in here doesn't mean that it's a bad deck. These decks, I think you should probably just leave at locals. They will do well at a local level, but if you take them to a higher level like a regional, out of 9 rounds, you're probably going to struggle a bit. I'm going to do things a little bit differently here. I'm actually going to go through in order of color, so that might actually help out a little bit for people finding the decks that they're wanting to pilot. Starting off, let's talk about Red Zoro from OP01. This leader, of course, has been here since the start of time. The leader ability is just generically good, putting a Dawn underneath itself and then buffing everything by 1000 power across the board. Can't argue with that. It's just a good generic ability. And of course, with Red Law in OP14 getting a lot of support, where you're getting a little bit of these like pips and little small characters, Red Zoro really takes advantage of those. So I actually think Red Zoro is a competitive deck. I can expect this deck to be in the top 32 at an event pretty consistently. Starter Deck 21 Luffy is a deck that I left off of my last tier list, and there were so many people in the comments that said, where's Starter Deck 21 Luffy? So kind of as a joke, I'm putting it in here. I don't think this deck is viable, so I'm going to put it in the Leave It Locals, but I have it in here just so those people at least feel a little bit better this time around. Now, the next deck we're talking about is Red Rayleigh. Red Rayleigh, I think, has been pretty solid overall. I don't think people have necessarily wanted to pilot it in OP13, but I do think that it actually has viability. The people that have put time into this deck have done really well with it. I can see this deck overall still continuing to do well. I think it might be more of a C tier rogue deck, although I could see it being a high C or a low B competitive. It doesn't get too many pieces of event support per se for this set, but it does get small characters like Zoro. But of course, with Rayleigh, you need events as well, and because it doesn't get any new events, the events that it has are just fine, don't get me wrong, but because it doesn't get anything really new, I think that Rayleigh can be a good deck, but I don't expect it to do that well that often. Onto a new leader with OP14 with Red Law. This leader can swap the base power of a Heart Pirate and or Supernova with each other, and so this can, of course, get multiple swings in a turn where you have these small characters and then you play a big character, and then the payoff there is that you're able to swap the base power, making a smaller character swing really big, and of course your opponent's going to want to try to answer these smaller bodies, and those act as a blocker in a way. So Red Law, I do think, is actually pretty solid. Now, it's not expected to do well in this meta because of the fact that there's just other decks that just are better than it in general, but I don't want to discount this deck. I do think that it has very good potential. There's a couple ways to build it. You can play more of an aggro variant of this deck, or you can play what I've been trying out is more of a control variant, because of course some of the support it gets with like the 7-cost Rush Zoro, being able to minus the power of other characters, synergizes really well with other characters that we already have existing in red, like the 7-cost Ben Beckman or the 8-cost Rayleigh. So if you do want to go more of a control route, you can, but I do think that we'll see more low to the ground, Supernova Rush in a sense. And as a result, I think that we'll probably see this do okay in some tournaments. Once again, I think this will be more of a high C, low B. I almost want to put it in competitive, but I don't feel confident enough that it will have results across the board. Red Green Law, I actually think is a very interesting deck at the moment. Once again, it has some support that it really takes advantage of from the Red Law coming out in OP14. I do think that this leader has a pretty solid matchup into decks like Blue Yellow Boa, which we'll see quite a lot of. There's not a whole lot of removal in general right now, and as a result, Red Green Law could actually be a deck that could fly under the radar for some people. So I'm going to put this towards the bottom of C, and keep in mind when we're putting these leaders into certain areas within the tier, the only ones that kind of really matter the placement of will be like S and A. I'll try to do my best for B and C and F, but B, C, and F could just kind of be a free-for-all as far as where they go. I will mention that obviously Red Law I mentioned is towards the top of the C tier, but Red Green Law is not a bottom of the C tier type deck. It'll fill out as we go along. Red Green Odin gets a piece of support with the EBO4 side of things. Of course, we're getting green, purple, and blue as of right now. We'll get the other colors later on in the year, but we actually have a 7-cost 8,000 power Kikunojo, which says activate main. If you have played this card this turn, you can restand your Land of Wano leader, and then of course with this leader, whenever you swing and you have a Dawn underneath it, it will gain 1,000 power until the end of your next turn. And so if you're swinging twice, it does stack. So it becomes a 7k leader, which is pretty powerful. And of course, having 8k on a body is pretty nice as well. So I do think that this is more of a rogue deck, but unfortunately, I don't think it's going to perform quite that well. It is very interesting, don't get me wrong, but I think it's a deck that you're going to want to leave at locals. So we'll put it in the F tier for now. Red Green Smoker's here because it does actually get a couple of pieces of support. The most notable one being the 5-cost X-Drake, which when you have Dawn underneath it will minus 2,000 power to something on the field. And then of course it has a way to protect from removal. So that's nice as well. Is it enough for Red Green Smoker to really make waves in the meta? I don't think so, but it is an interesting addition to the deck. Like Red Green Odin, just because it does get a nice little addition doesn't mean that it's going to be hyper competitive. So I will put it at the leave it locals, but worth experimenting with in my opinion. Red Green Luffy actually has a nice little blocker that it gets in the green Nami, the 4-cost that rests 2 characters. That just insane that it can rest 2 characters that are 8-cost or less, and then it restands Dawn at the end of the turn, which is everything that this leader needs and wants. Once again, though, along the same lines as like Red Green Odin, Red Green Smoker, is that enough for this leader to be super strong and make it into a meta where they have to be able to build a board and contest other characters? I don't think so. The problem with Red Green Luffy is that while it is tanky, it doesn't do a great job at establishing board along the way. It might play a character or two. Sometimes it doesn't really play anything meaningful on the board. So as a result, this leader, I will have to put it leave it locals as well. Although I will say it's probably one of the better leaders here in the F tier. It could potentially be a rogue tier deck. Red Blue Ace. Now this leader, of course, in OP13 was the best leader around. A lot of decks had to play around this leader, and it was one of the 2 best decks in the format, in my opinion. And I think not much has changed for it. It didn't get much support, but it didn't need much support anyway. I think this leader, of course, just being powerful innately is enough for it. Some of the composition of the deck will change, of course. If we see a lot of Mihawk, then I think we'll see more cost, or rather power reduction added into the deck. So maybe the Ace, Sabo, and Luffy 2k counter could be added in. I have seen some builds putting in Round Table, other things that can reduce the cost cost of rested characters. So I think Red Blue Ace is continuing to be an S tier deck. I really expect this deck to perform well. It will have struggles against some of the new decks, don't get me wrong. I don't think it's going to be the best deck in the format, but I think it will still be very good, to the point where if you take this deck and you played it in the previous format and you're still continuing to play it and learn and get better at it, this deck will reward you, and as a result, it will stay in the S tier for OP14. Red Purple Sugar really takes advantage of some of the new Purple Dofi support, and it also has some other support coming out, I believe, in EBO3, but unfortunately, because it doesn't have that support in EBO3 right now, it's not hyper competitive. It is a good deck in general, but I'm going to leave it at the locals tier right now. It could be better once we get EBO3 out and you get another piece of support with a Monet blocker. I think that comes out in EBO3, but the rest of the stuff that comes out with the Purple Doflamingo package is pretty good, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it really changes too much of the gameplay overall. Red Purple Roger is a deck that I think had potential last set, but unfortunately it just didn't get what it needed in time, which was the 8-cost Roger promo. But now that that is finally out, I think that this deck is really good. And I think it's more of a competitive deck than an event topping deck. And the only reason it's not an A tier deck, in my opinion, is because of the fact that you are your own worst enemy. What draws you get are basically all you see. Roger has a really hard time finding its pieces consistently, but of course with the 8-cost Roger being searchable by the 1-cost Purple Shanks, it means that you can actually find some of your top end a little bit better. Of course, previously it was running 9-cost Newgate, it was running 10-cost Shanks. I would expect the 10-cost Shanks to possibly be cut down a little bit more and just go all into the buffing characters like the 9-cost Newgate, the 8-cost Roger, and of course finishing the game with the 10-cost Rush Roger that wins the game on the spot if somebody blocks at 0 life. So with this leader, I could see it being a high competitive deck. I could also see it being near A, but I will put it at the top of B as of right now. Red Black Kobe, it's just not its time quite yet. I think once EBO3 comes out, this leader will actually be very competitive, and it will be pretty scary to have to go against. But in the meantime, it's not awful, but I don't think it's quite there yet. It's missing a little bit of its pieces. So once we do get that piece that it's missing in EBO3, this deck will be pretty good. Red Black Sabo is a deck that I think was one of the best decks in the last format and had really good contention to be able to fight against Ace. It didn't do really well against Emu, unfortunately, which is one of the reasons why I kind of like fell off a bit, but I do think that this deck is pretty powerful. As a result, I think it could be a very strong competitive deck. This one is probably, out of the competitive decks we've talked about so far, the best one out of it because of the fact that it's just so tanky, right? As the game goes on, obviously it wants to take life so that it can really proc its leader ability, buffing everything on the board. But when you get the 6-cost Sabo blocker established and then you start chaining 8-cost characters into like Stussies, into like 10-cost characters, this leader is just really strong, and I think it will continue to be powerful, but I think it will still be eclipsed by Emu. I think it will probably have some issues against some other decks that we'll talk about in a bit. Red Yellow Bello Betty. This one is a deck that's more of an answer to the meta rather than being a meta defining deck. I think that if the meta becomes a lot of Ace, which I don't think it will be mostly Ace. I think we'll see a lot of Boa, spoiler alert. As a result, Boa has better triggers, in my opinion, or more consistent triggers than Bello Betty. That's where Bello Betty really pops off, is when they start getting triggers going. But of course, Bello Betty is nothing to scoff at. I think it's probably a strong rogue tier deck. I could expect this to be in the top 32, top 16. Somebody could pilot it and do really well with it, but I don't think enough people will be playing it for that to happen. And it doesn't get a lot of support in the new set, so it kind of just has what it has, and what it has is still strong, but I think it's more of an answer to the meta than anything else. Red Yellow Sub was definitely an interesting one. I want to put this into the tier list because of the fact that it does have a lot of different ways you can build it. Revolutionary Army is one way that people have started to build it. The other way you can build it is with a Thriller Bark package in yellow, which is interesting for sure. I don't know if it is good, but I definitely would like to experiment with this leader a little bit more. As a result, I think it's a rogue deck because I am not quite sure how it would do, how it stacks up against a lot of the other meta, but it is a deck that I think is worth noting because of the fact that there's many different ways to build it, and if you find the right build and have a good run, this could go far in a tournament. On to green, we're going to talk about Bonnie here. I don't really know if Bonnie takes advantage of any of the new green support that Mihawk gets. I think this leader is just going to forever be a strong leader because of the abilities just generically strong, and it can just be a green good stuff deck. So it has a pretty good matchup into like Ace, and I will say that if Boa starts popping off, this deck can really take advantage of that deck in general because it has 8-cost Kid. And 8-cost Kid will stop a lot of the aggression that we'll see with some of the top decks. So I think that Bonnie's going to be an A-tier deck. I could expect people that play it to do well with it. Will a lot of people play it? I probably not, but because it is such a threat to some of the top decks, I have to respect it and I'll put it in the A tier. Carrot's a deck that I have always considered along the same lines as Bonnie. It's just a generically good green leader. With Carrot, you have a new 8-cost Carrot, which will restand, I think, your leader and like 2 of your Minx characters, so you can lean more heavily into the Minx package. Of course, with that being said, the 10-cost Law and Beppo is searchable with this deck. I guess it's searchable in Bonnie if you want to run the 1-cost Perona searcher, but I think that it's better suited to be able to have in this deck and find it a lot easier. I think Carrot is worth playing, and I think it's a pretty strong deck. Is it a competitive deck? At the end of the day, it's close. I would put it at probably towards the bottom of B, top of C. I could see this sneaking into like a top 32, definitely easily 64 if that's the case. It's been strong, and I think it just got a little bit more stronger with the support it got. So yeah, I don't mind putting this in the B tier. Green Jinbei is a leader that I haven't thought about in a minute, but it did get a couple of pieces of support that actually work really well with this leader. It has a 4-cost, I forget the name of it, it's like a shark, and basically it's a 2k counter that on play, if you rest it, you can KO a rested 8,000 power character. So that's pretty powerful, of course. It also gets a 7-cost, 8,000 power Jinbei blocker that says when this is KO'd, I think you can rest one of your cards and then bring out a 6-cost character from your hand. So that's actually pretty nice as well. Jinbei is worth exploring a little bit more. I think it's a pretty strong deck, but I don't think it's better than like Carrot, for instance. This could struggle with the fact that it just doesn't have an amazing late game. It has a pretty solid mid game, but unfortunately that's not enough to carry it across the line compared to some of these other decks. So I'm going to put it in the rogue tier, but I think it's definitely good. I think it's a strong deck, and it's probably towards the top end of the C tier. On to Zoro. Zoro was a deck that I think a lot of people expected to do very well because it has a good matchup into Ace, but I think a lot of the Ace players were figuring out how to beat Zoro, and of course Zoro just has a really tough time against Emu, and Emu will still be a deck that's hard to deal with. Also, to talk about this, when it goes against decks like Boa where it spams the board, or decks like Purple Dofi where you can redirect attacks, this leader isn't nearly as good as it once was. I do think it's a really strong leader still, so don't get me wrong, I think it's a powerful leader, but I'm going to put it towards the top of the competitive tier. I think this one is probably the best deck in the competitive tier. I can consider this one to be in the top 16 enough times. I think it will be a consistent top 32. I might consider this even one to win in a tournament with a really good run, a little bit of luck, but I don't consider this one to be a hyper competitive deck or for one to be shaping the meta around it. Onto the new green leader from OP14. Mihawk has an ability that says you can rest one of your cards, and if there's a 5-cost character on the board, you can restand 3 Dawn. So this just means you can swing a little bit harder or use that Dawn more defensively. This leader has a lot of interesting support out the gate with the 7-cost Shanks. You have a 5-cost Perona. You have a 5-cost, I think it's a Tashigi, and of course the 9-cost Mihawk Secret Rare is pretty powerful as well. All of these cards in the arsenal make a great curve going first. Unfortunately, though, this leader suffers from just not enough consistency. If you miss your curve, it can be pretty rough. But of course, it has enough pieces to be able to search. Like the Perona can find enough things, and you will take life being a 5-life leader. You can eventually find your pieces either in life or through draws. So this leader is still pretty powerful. I will put it at the top of the A tier. I don't think it's quite an S tier meta defining deck. It has the potential to be. I think it's a really strong leader, and we will see this win tournaments from time to time. Will this consistently win tournaments? I don't think it's quite that good yet. It is a really strong leader, don't get me wrong. It just suffers from the consistency error. Green, blue, Zoro, and Sanji. I think I've said this in every one of my videos. I will forever, at least for the foreseeable future, continue to put this in the rogue tier. It's just a deck that I think has potential to pop off. It's pretty good. I don't think enough people pilot it, and when they do pilot it, they don't do it very well, but it has potential to do like OTKs, which is really nice. So I will keep this in the C tier rogue. I don't think it's going to win tournaments, but I hope it does. Green Purple Doflamingo, very similar to Red Purple Sugar, has a lot of new purple support in the Don Quixote Pirates family, based off of the purple Dofi leader that we get in this set from OP14. So as a result, this leader becomes a lot more powerful. It gets access to the 10 cost Doflamingo. So, well, it has one already. It has the green one, which stuns 3 units, but you also have the purple one, which -3 Don, and you can stun 3 units. Actually, the units can't rest, or you can KO an 8 cost. So this, I actually think, could be pretty popular to play with at a local level. Will it be a good leader in a competitive tournament? It's not bad. I don't think it's awful. I think it's a pretty solid rogue tier pick if you're wanting to really have a deck that could take some people by surprise, has hyper consistency. It has so many searchers, so many ways to find its top end. Its top end just really causes people to suffer. I think this deck could be potentially good. I think the problem here is that not enough people will pilot it, and there's probably decks out there that could do a little bit better into this deck overall. So if you're going to play a deck that has any of the new Purple Dofi support, I'd probably just play Purple Dofi. Green Purple Lim is, I think, a competitive deck. Actually, it's one that did pretty well at a local level from what I've seen in the last set. And I think that this deck, it didn't get anything really new, but it's just really good at spitting out bodies and ramping up fast and then just overwhelming the opponent. So I do think Lim is worth noting. At being an aggressive deck has a really strong advantage for it. I think aggressive decks are going to be good in general in this next meta, so I think Lim is probably worth at least messing around with in the B tier. Green Purple Luffy. This one is one that has suffered from facing against Emu. Emu was able to just KO base powers, so the Sanji and Pudding being able to be buffed by stage didn't really matter, but there is a new 3-cost green Luffy that says if a Straw Hat would be removed, you can rest a character. So that's pretty nice. I think that's in place of what was supposed to be a promo Robin. It might be the same thing, I'm not entirely sure, but Green Purple Luffy, I actually think is a pretty competitive deck with that in mind, because the biggest problem that it's had is obviously with Emu being in the meta, just being able to answer anything it played down. Now it's a lot harder for Emu to answer that, and so I think Emu was one of the decks that was really stopping it, and so I actually think that this deck is a competitive deck. I would comfortably put it at the top of B tier. I don't think people are going to play it, though. That's the problem. I don't know if anyone's going to actually try to take this deck and play it, because it's been around for a little while, since EBO 2, I think, and so everyone likes to play the new stuff that comes out, and I don't think Green Purple Luffy is going to be one that's played too often. Green Yellow Arlong is a deck that I always respect. I think it's an interesting leader, and with the new Thriller Bark Pirates package, this leader just gets a little bit more annoying with the triggers. It just has bodies that spit out, and of course, there's a 1-cost 2k counter Perona that has been out for a little while. It says you can search, I think, top 4, top 5, and you find, I think it's a Thriller Bark or like a Mihawk, and then you trash 1 card. So basically what you're trying to do with the Thriller Bark Pirates package is you're trying to get at least 1 character that's the Thriller Bark Pirate into the trash, so that if you do get a trigger that brings out a 4-cost Thriller Bark, you can do that. So that card works perfectly with Arlong. I think Thriller Bark Pirates package is pretty strong in this leader, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be a strong deck. It is okay, but it's more of a leave it locals deck, so I will keep it in the F tier for now. Shirahoshi is also getting that support that I mentioned for Green Jinbei. Unfortunately, Shirahoshi doesn't attack, so that's like a big problem for Shirahoshi in general, but I think that she's pretty powerful with her 2-cost Shirahoshi that prevents characters from being KO'd by flipping life, or I guess it's not even KO, just removal in general. If your character is a 6-cost or lower, you can flip your top life up to prevent that attack, and then on defense, I think your Neptunians have plus 2,000 power, so pretty strong overall to be able to keep a board on the board consistently. That's the biggest problem with Shirahoshi, was you could just remove her stuff and she can't attack. So with that kind of having a solution to it, I think Shirahoshi is actually worth exploring a little bit. It's a rogue tier deck in my opinion. I don't think it's better than like Rayleigh, for instance, but it has potential to be better than some of the other decks below it. So I'm going to put Shirahoshi in a deck that's worth exploring. Blue Doflamingo, I think, was one that in the last set I thought was pretty strong. I thought that you could have potential to pop off against some of the top tier decks. It doesn't get really anything in this new set, unfortunately, for it. or it doesn't really take advantage of it, but I think that doesn't really matter too much. It's still just a strong leader. I will put this in the bottom of the competitive tier. I don't expect it to do very well that often, but I do think it's a leader that has a strong base, and being able to spit out bodies is always a good thing. As I mentioned, I think aggressiveness in this meta will be a powerful thing, and Doflamingo is really good at being aggressive. Ivankov is a leader that I didn't expect to talk about for quite some time. I think I've taken it off my tier list in general just because of the fact that, well, it's one of those that hasn't gotten any support, and when you don't get support over many sets, it kind of, you just fall off, right? So Ivankov has fallen off over time, but randomly in OP14, it gets 2 really strong pieces of support. One with the 5-cost blocker Hannibal, which can cheat out a 6-cost by pitching cards out of hand, which Ivankov wants to do. And then you also get an 8-cost, I think it's Shiryu, which is an 8-cost 10,000 power character, which says return any character to the owner's hand, and then you have to pitch all of your cards out of hand. So that's great removal for Ivankov, because Ivankov, once again, wants to be like at 0, so at the end of the turn, you can draw 2 cards. And then when you have the 6-cost Inazuma, which also draws 2 cards at the end of the turn, you're drawing 4 cards at the end of the turn, you're cycling through your deck really quickly, and you have enough cards to be able to protect your units. Most of your units are going to be 7,000 power anyway, so it's pretty easy to protect them with a card or 2. I think Ivankov is actually somewhat of a competitive deck. I've been a real fan of this leader since it came out. I played it a lot in OP02, and I'm happy to play it again. I've been playing it recently, and it feels pretty strong. I would put it at the bottom of the B tier. It's more than likely actually a C tier rogue deck, but I have a little bit of bias towards Ivankov, and I think it can do well. I've done well against a lot of the top decks with this leader, but I don't think that a lot of other people will do very well with it, unfortunately, but I do think it has potential to be really strong. Blue Jinbei is a leader that's probably my favorite to come out of OP14. I think a lot of people, when they see the ability of pitching cards to put Rested Dawn underneath characters, seems really bad because you're like losing card advantage in the process, but I think because you are in a deck that draws a lot of cards, and of course your opponent's going to want to swing into the units that you've swung with, you don't necessarily need the cards for protection. So I think Jinbei actually has a really strong footing in this meta. The 8-cost Jinbei that you get that has Rush, bounces a 7-cost, draws you cards, just does it all, right? It's really good. And of course, if you see a really strong curve, dropping a couple of 1-drops, dropping a 4-drop that brings out a 3-drop, and then of course playing a 6-cost that draws you cards, this leader is pretty good. I actually really like it. I'll probably play this leader for fun, but I think that it has potential to do very well. I'm going to put it into the bottom of the A tier for the time being. I think that this leader, while people have thought the leader ability is bad, I don't think it's actually that bad. Blue Nami is in an interesting spot. I think that she actually has some viability here. I think that when people saw this leader initially, when you can only have East blue cards in the deck, people thought it was really bad, but there has been some support printed over time. So I actually think that this leader is worth playing. I still don't really think Nami's a great leader overall. I'm not like a fan of this leader, but that being said, I can't let my biases rule everything. We only get like 1 or 2 bias checks. The Ivankov is a bias check. So Nami here, I think more realistically is a rogue tier deck. Can have a good matchup against some of the top tier decks, but probably struggles against a lot of the other decks in the field in similar regards. So I don't think it's the top of rogue tier. It's probably around, I don't know, here or so. Once again, though, C tier is kind of just like a free-for-all. I do think that this deck is probably the best in the C tier, and then the rest are kind of like arguable. Blue Yellow Ace is a deck that I wanted to bring up because, well, it was the least played deck in the sim for all of 2025, and that's a little bit surprising to me because of the fact that it does have the 8-cost event to bring out the 10-cost blocker Newgate, and you can also use your leader ability off of that. So I think this leader is better than people gave it credit for. Is it a great deck? Can you take it to a tournament and do well with it? No, but I think it's a deck worth mentioning, and I want to see more people cook with this deck. I'm going to leave it at locals for now, unfortunately, but it's worth noting that this leader has some synergy with some cards that came out last set that I don't think people really thought too much about. On to Blue Yellow Nami. She is really close to being scary, like really scary. I think she's a good leader overall. I think that she's probably going to be bottom of A tier, top of B tier for the OP14 EBO4 meta. She's just missing the EBO3 5-cost Nami to make her really strong. She finally gets, what is it, girl or young girl from the special. You just have to go to a pre-release and get that. So make sure you can get that while you can, because everyone knows the Poke Bros are taking over the One Piece scene right now, and who knows, they might actually take a hold of that card and sell it for a lot. But that being said, I think that Nami has actually a really good matchup into Boa, and Boa is going to be a deck that I will expect a lot of. It's in my opinion, well, it's the next one up, but I think it's an S tier deck. Spoiler alert. But I think Nami is more of an A tier deck, probably around here. I am a little bit scared going against Nami in general, just because she can be really, really strong. She just gets really strong. Actually, she's going to be more of a bottom tier, A tier deck, because she doesn't have the 7-cost Robin quite yet either, which I think comes out in EBO3. She's very, very close to being a super strong deck, though. All right, Boa. Boa is the flavor of the month. Everyone is talking about Boa. She has been a leader that I think in the East has populated and has done really well. It's really difficult to deal with Boa, because if you don't swing into her, you get punished because they will swing into you and then rip your life with different cards. If you swing into her, then there's potential that she will have triggers come out, and then you take more damage the following turn. You can't get rid of the bodies, because if you do, then you take life. So it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. So this leader is one that I think is going to be an S tier deck. People are going to have to learn to play around it. This deck will win tournaments. This deck will be, I don't know if it's going to be dominating, but it will be very strong. And I think it's going to be an S tier deck in general. I think it's going to be probably more popular than Ace, and probably being able to beat Ace more consistently than Ace beats it. So I think Boa is a very strong leader overall. I don't think it comes to anyone's surprise that I have this in the S tier. On to Blue Purple Luffy. Finally gets an 8-cost Roger for this set for OP14. A set too late. I think it could have been really good in OP13. But unfortunately, we didn't have that at that time. This leader is really strong, though, because it can be flexible with what it puts in. It has to be able to answer the meta, and as a result, you can put things in like Gravity Blade or the 9-cost Mihawks to be able to answer things that Boa spits out, or even that like green Mihawk spits out. This leader, though, unfortunately, I don't think will have a great time against a lot of decks that run Pudding. So if you do go against Jinbeis or Boas or Nami's, I think you're going to have a problem. So I will put this in the A tier, because I do think it's a really strong deck in general, and I can see this doing well. But there will be some decks that give it issues. I do think it has a good Ace matchup, and I know that I've said that a lot of decks have good Ace matchups, and at this point, why is Ace in the S tier if it has a lot of bad matchups? I think Ace is just a good leader in general, and so that's the reason why it's still in the S tier. On to Blue Purple Sanji. I think that this leader is very close to being a strong leader. Once again, it's like in an EBO3 waiting room along with Kobe. Where it differs from Kobe, though, I think it actually can perform currently. Not saying Kobe can't. I will, though, as a respect to Kobe, put this at the Leave It Locals. I'm not saying this is a bad deck. I think these two are very comparable, that they're both waiting for EBO3 in order for them to be a competitive deck. I think once the EBO3 support comes out for Sanji and comes out for Kobe, both of these decks will be competitive. This deck does get some support with EBO4, which makes it actually, now that I think about it, there are some pieces of support, like some events that can cheat out bodies, like a Sanji, I think from Trash. And you also have a way to search with another event that comes out in EBO4. So maybe this is not necessarily a Leave It Locals. This could be more of a rogue tier deck in the meantime. But once it gets the EBO3 support with the 5-cost Reiju, which can basically, I think you minus Dawn and you can play an event that's 7 or less from your trash for free, basically, that's pretty strong. Being able to have a body that comes out and then play either a Red Rock if somebody went tall, or a Gravity Blade if somebody went wide, it's pretty devastating to the opponent. So right now, I think it's a rogue tier deck. I think it will be a competitive or even an event topping deck once EBO3 comes out. Uzan got some support with EBO4. I think that it has a nice little package with the Isho that came out, the 5-cost 7,000 power Isho that basically rips cards from the opponent's hand. And as you're ripping cards from the opponent's hand, you draw cards, which feels really awful as an opponent. I've had this happen to me and it feels bad. And this thing actually won, I think, a recent online tournament. And so I think it's a pretty strong deck. I would put it in rogue tier, but because it actually performed pretty well recently, I would say that it's actually a competitive deck. Better than, I would say, Blue Dofi and probably Ivankov. I could see it being a little bit better than Lim as well. I think this deck is worth at least experimenting with if you're unsure of what deck to play for this set. See if it's good for you. I actually think that with the new support it gets is pretty powerful. It also has a 4-cost 6,000 power character that when it attacks, you draw 1, trash 1. But with this ability, of course, you're drawing 1 and then you're also drawing another 1 because of that. So very powerful. You can get a huge hand size really fast. Of course, you have to keep in mind that pudding is a thing. So if you're going against blue decks, you want to counter out as much as possible. But Kuzan's worth running. I want to bring up Usopp because Usopp is a leader that has an interesting combo that I want to talk about really fast. So, of course, Usopp hasn't really been meta relevant for a couple sets, but I also don't think it's super relevant right now. But it is worth noting that you have Hakuba, which is a 5-cost 6,000 power character that with 1 Dawn attached, when you swing, you can KO a character and then give something -5 on the opponent's side of the field. This coupled with the 8-cost Croc, the new secret rare, which whenever it's KO'd, you can trash a card to bring it back out. That will prevent your opponent from attacking with 2 big characters, which is very powerful and a great tempo swing. Will this be a consistent thing for Usopp? I don't think so, but it's very interesting to note the synergy there because when you're trashing cards from hand, you're also helping get within range of 5 cards in hand for the Usopp ability. I think it's worth noting. I don't think it's a great leader overall. I think we'll keep it at the locals level, but I definitely want to mess around with this and see how it does. I'm a little bit excited to try that combo out. On to Purple Kaido. I think that this leader is one that is baiting people into thinking it's really good. Kaido gets 2 really awesome pieces, actually 3 really awesome pieces of support with a queen. That's a 1-cost queen. You have a 6-cost king and a 7-cost rush Kaido that rests a character. All really good, and all of these things help ramp you up time after time. Actually, I don't know if the Kaido does, but I know the king and the queen do. So all of that being said, this will allow you to use your leader ability more consistently, which has always been the thing that Kaido has really struggled with because -7 is a huge ask. And on top of that, the other thing that this leader has a problem with is not having counter in hand. And then also, whenever you use your 10-cost board wipe Kaido, you kill everything. But of course, with the 6-cost king and the 7-cost Kaido that I just mentioned, they have the ability to prevent themselves from being KO'd, which is really nice for this leader. The other thing it gets is another Blast Breath equivalent. So that is really nice, of course. This leader, the more I talk about it, it actually does sound pretty good. Maybe you guys are not getting baited into thinking it's a good leader. No, you really are, though. It's not that great. It still has the same problems it always has. The problem it has had consistently is that it can get overrun by aggression, and it doesn't have enough counter to be able to survive all the hits. All of those cards I mentioned, minus the queen, are counterless. So it doesn't really get any extra counter to be able to survive. It will be a good deck, and I think it's a deck that will be or should be respected. I think it's a bottom of the competitive. I could see this sneaking into like maybe a top 32, but I think there was a tournament recently where obviously online tournaments aren't everything here and there, but it was like the most represented deck. It had like 8 decks being played in total, and I don't think any of them topped. I could be wrong there, but I expect more from this based off of what I was just talking about. So this deck is worth at least, you know, messing around with and trying out because of the new support, but I think it still has the same problems it has always had. Purple Luffy is a deck that I thought was really good in the last set because of the fact it has Magellan and can handle Emu pretty well. But with Emu not being nearly as popular in this next set, I think Luffy probably falls down a tier or 2. I think it's a good deck, but I think it's a deck you're probably not going to want to play too often of. And of course, as I mentioned, aggression, I think is the name of the game going into OP14, and Purple Luffy doesn't really do well against decks that go wide. So I think that Purple Luffy will probably be a deck that moves to the locals. It's a strong deck. I think it's probably one of the best decks out of here, but I don't think it's going to be a deck you're going to want to take to a tournament. Foxy. Oh boy, Foxy's a deck that I haven't thought about in a while as well, but he does get a couple of pieces of support with EBO4. He gets an 8-cost, 9,000 power Foxy that on play, Dawn -1. I think you draw 2, trash 1, and then you can rest an opponent's character that is 9-cost or less, so allowing your leader to at least have another target besides the opponent's leader. With all of that, it's really strong. I think that this leader is scary. I actually think it's a pretty scary leader. With all that being said, I am going to put this into... Is this my like controversial pick for this? I think it's a competitive deck. I think that this deck is not necessarily going to be like a breadwinner for sure, but I think it's a deck that is to be respected. I think along the same lines as Kuzan, I think that this deck, with the support it got, actually is pretty solid. So I could see Foxy doing well. Locking leaders down, locking characters down is always a good thing. Purple Dofi, a new leader from OP14, I really like this leader. I think the base art of this leader is so sick. I think that one thing that I've always, and this is a side tangent really quickly, please divulge me here. The base leaders for most leaders in this game, I think, don't look great, but Purple Dofi, for whatever reason, looks awesome. So that being said, Purple Dofi on base art alone is an S tier, but as a leader, how is he? I think he's a pretty strong leader overall. He gets the new 10 cost Dofi, which can freeze 3 7 cost or lower. By freeze, I mean they can't be rested. You can also use that to KO an 8 cost character if you like. You have obviously the 8 cost Dofi, which can bring out a 5 cost character. You have a new Virgo, which is built in anti-removal. So all of those things in general are really good. Of course, the leader ability, Dawn -1, and you can redirect an attack. You have things that are beneficial to be KO'd, like a Searcher that also ramps you. Then you also have the 4 cost Sugar, which ramps you and then brings out a 5 cost character if your opponent's at 6 Dawn. You have a 4 cost character that I forget her name, I think it's Baby 5. When she's KO'd, you can Dawn -1 to heal 1. So I think Dofi's pretty strong. I think maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just doing awful with this deck, but I think that he has a problem against Boa. And I, as Ace, don't have any issues going against Purple Dofi. So as a result, I don't think he's necessarily going to be an S tier deck, but I think he's one that's very viable and can compete with a lot of the other decks and will be able to beat a lot of the decks below him. Purple Yellow Croc is a deck that I really enjoy playing with this next set in particular because of the 9 cost Boa Hancock. The yellow 9 cost Boa Hancock, which I didn't even mention, is like Big Mom Jr. here. And that's one of the reasons why this Boa is so strong, because she has all of these bodies that come out. She's like basically, I didn't even mention this, she's like Katakuri on steroids, where if you attack her, she gets bodies out of life, and then eventually she plays a 9 cost, which heals her and then puts a card from your life into your hand. So Purple Yellow Croc actually can also use that as well, because he is a 7 Warlords of the Sea, which is the stipulation for that 9 cost Boa Hancock. So I think that he has a lot of tools to heal. He has the 6 cost Kuma, he has the 8 cost Croc, he has the 9 cost Boa Hancock, he has Okama My Way to be able to redirect attacks into characters that on KO can heal or trash life. I think he's pretty good. I actually like him a lot. I think he's a pretty strong leader. He's not a great leader, but he's a fun leader in my opinion, and as a result, fun is C tier for me, at least for this leader alone. On to Nico Robin. I think Nico Robin is a answer to the meta. I don't think she's necessarily that strong. She's really good into Boa Hancock because Boa Hancock wants to get her triggers off, but if she can't get triggers off because you're swinging with Banish, so I think Nico Robin is a great answer. She's not really great against a lot of other decks. She kind of falls flat against a lot, so I will put her in a rogue tier. I think she's good, really good against Boa. If you're expecting a lot of Boa in your meta, you should probably play Robin if you're sick of seeing Boa. King, like Kaido, also got the same support for what he's trying to do. I don't know if King really uses it as well as Kaido does, and of course being a 4-life leader versus 5-life leader actually matters a lot in this meta. So I think King, even though he does get the nice 3 pieces of support there, I don't think he's that great overall. So while he is a leader that I've always enjoyed and always want to make work, I think he's a locals leader for now, so we'll put him in the F tier. Moria, worth mentioning that he does get a couple pieces of support as well in black, but I think that overall, this Moria in comparison to the black-yellow Moria is not nearly as strong. He can be good, but I think overall, he's not that great, so I'm going to put him in the F tier as well. I don't know where he belongs, probably like right around here. I don't know why he was in here. I guess maybe because there were some like support that he got, but that's about it. I don't really think this Moria is that great right now. On to Teach. I think Teach could be a good answer to a lot of the meta above him. He's kind of like same thing with Nico Robin, kind of like a pick depending on the meta, could be a good pick to take to a tournament. It's more of a meta read than anything else. I think he is a competitive deck. He's probably the best black deck that we have currently. Black is kind of suffering a bit from not having an identity or really anything worth running, unfortunately. I mean, obviously Emu is, when we get to Emu, I'll change my opinion on that, but I think Teach is a competitive deck. His His deck list doesn't really change too much overall, but it doesn't really need to. So he's going to be more of an answer to the meta. I think he probably belongs around here. Emu is, well, what can I say? Emu is just really, really difficult to deal with for a lot of decks and will continue to be so. And so I don't think it's really anything to ponder. Emu is an S tier deck. Is Emu the best deck in the format? I think these two are probably interchangeable. I'm going to probably put Emu as the best deck still. Nothing's changed for this deck, and nothing really needs to. It's just a really good deck. The later the game goes on, the harder it gets to beat this deck. Okay, Black Croc is actually another deck that I think is within the black ecosystem a really strong leader overall. Unfortunately, I think that this leader doesn't really do great against Ace or Emu for that matter, but can do well against a lot of other leaders. And I really enjoy this leader. Now, I said that Jimbei, Blue Jimbei, was my favorite from OP14, and I could be telling the truth on that, but if I'm not telling the truth, I think my second favorite or first favorite could be this Black Croc. So I actually think that this leader is pretty strong. I don't think it's going to be a deck that we'll see a lot of people playing, but I do think it's a low A, high B. I think this is probably the definition of B. This is probably the best deck. I thought I said Zora was earlier, but I actually think that this deck is probably the best of competitive. I could see it being a top 32 deck, potentially top 16. Winning a tournament, that's a hard ask. But regardless, the deck plays very well going first or second. You have a 7-cost Nico Robin, which acts as like a mini Moria from way back when, and then it has an 8-cost Croc, which can freeze in a turn, can freeze 2 units from attacking the next turn, which is very powerful, and it has KO protection, so it keeps coming back. And then, of course, you have some counter events, which are really powerful as well, which I think that this Croc is pretty strong, but I don't think it's going to be winning a tournament anytime soon. Black Yellow Moria is a new leader from OP14 as well that says when it attacks, you can trash 3 cards from your hand and heal a life, and then you can also trash a card on the field, or KO a card on the field rather, and then all of your characters get plus 1,000 power. And so I think that this character is pretty powerful. Now, I said all of your characters, it might be Thriller Bark, I might be misremembering that, but regardless, this character is still really strong because of the fact that it plays such a strong trigger package with all of the Thriller Bark support. You have a Perona, which on play and on KO says that you can freeze a 6-cost or lower from attacking. You have a Hogback, which brings out a character. You have an Absalom, which searches when it's KO'd. So all of these things are really awesome for this deck. It runs the 6-cost Moria, which can bring a character out. It runs a new 8-cost Moria, which can bring a 4-cost from trash and put it at the top of life or onto the field. And of course, it can also run the 9-cost Boa Hancock, which I mentioned earlier. So all of these things are great for this leader. The unfortunate thing here is it runs a lot of bricks. And so, of course, being able to pitch those for an extra life is nice in a pinch, but I think this leader, while some people think it's really strong, I think it's not necessarily that great overall. There will be some people that will play it and do well with it. The vast majority of people will not. And I think, unfortunately, just at a glance, this is probably one of the worst leaders to come out of this set. Actually, Law is probably one of the worst leaders to come out of this set. But that being said, both Law and this Moria are still good. So that just speaks to the power of this set, being able to have a set like 13 where there's clearly like 2 leaders that are really good and the rest are really hard to pilot against those leaders. When you have leaders like Moria and Law that are the worst out of that set, well, I guess arguably the worst, and they're still doing well into the meta, I think that this really speaks to the health of the meta overall. That being said, Moria to me, unfortunately, is a rogue tier deck or bottom of the B competitive. I think Moria probably belongs right around here. Now that I'm thinking about it and I see this Ivankov face just staring at me all the time, I definitely was on some copium when I put that here. So we're gonna move the Ivankov down to the rogue tier. That being said, I think Ivankov is really strong overall. On to Katakuri in yellow. So yellow, of course, has a Thriller Bark Pirates package, and I think it's worth running in Katakuri, actually, because of the fact that you can get bodies out for free, and you're really aggressive as Katakuri in general. And then, of course, you can have your 10-cost Big Mom to close out games. Katakuri, I think, is just generically a great yellow leader, or it's a good yellow leader. I shouldn't say it's a great yellow leader. That being said, I think it's more of a rogue deck. I don't see it being hyper competitive. I think it's pretty strong overall, and I think it's probably around here. The power level is really strong in general, but I don't know if it's going to be able to beat the decks above it consistently. Vegapunk in the last set, I think, was more of a rogue deck that I don't think a lot of people piloted, but it actually got a nice little support piece with the 5-cost Shaka, and then also it got the 9-cost Bonnie that rushes and doesn't rip a life, but puts a life into the opponent's hand. I think that it doesn't really get anything in this set either, but you're not going to want to run the Thriller Bark Pirate package. I think Vegapunk, though, unfortunately, is not necessarily a leader I'm going to want to run too often. I think it's probably going to be a rogue deck that people could do well with. Somebody will pilot this and probably finish in a top 64 at some point in time this set, or at least I hope so, but I don't think this leader is going to be very strong in general. Piss Kid is a yellow leader that I think has the answers to beat Boa Hancock, very similarly to Nico Robin. But is Piss Kid good enough to beat a lot of the other decks above it? It's not awful. I think the fact that it has a searchable trash life and also can redirect an attack into Basil Hawkins means that this leader is just good in general. But I don't think it's a competitive leader. Actually, that's not true. I could see it probably doing well at a tournament or two. It's probably towards the bottom end of the competitive tier. I think it's a good yellow deck in general. It doesn't get any support though. Doesn't really need it. The cards it has are just really good in general. So I think that Piss Kid will probably be a deck that's okay, but not amazing. And I think same thing with Bonnie being the last leader here to talk about in yellow. Bonnie is a leader that will probably actually run the Thriller Bark Pirates package, funnily enough. So as a result, she's going to be really annoying to deal with for a lot of decks, but a lot of decks will also be able to beat her pretty easily. I think she's probably going to be a top of the tier rogue deck or a bottom of the B tier competitive deck. I don't know if she's going to be a competitive deck per se, and I don't want to like bait people into thinking she's that amazing. So I'm probably going to just put her at the C rogue tier deck. So there you have it. This is what I think are going to be the most competitive decks for the OP13 meta. No surprise that Emu and Ace, in my opinion, are still going to be the top tier decks. I think Boa is a nice introduction into the meta. I think all of the decks in the A tier have the ability to beat the S tier. I just think that we'll see more people playing the S tier decks and probably have a higher conversion of winning with these decks in general. I could be wrong on the Ace. I think Ace could potentially fall down to A tier over time, but still a strong deck overall. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think about the tier list. What leaders are you excited to play in OP14? I'm excited for Jimbei and Purple Dofi in general, but I'll probably play Ace at a competitive level. That being said, there's going to be lots of videos for OP14. I have quite a few leaders cooked up already, so make sure to sub to the channel if you haven't already. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.